All right, good morning. Yes, indeed, Ferlansky, a Saturday stream. How's everyone doing? Hey, full bong rip. Thanks for hopping in right early on here. How's it going? Yeah, Saturday stream. That's kind of part of, that's my intention is that's part of our new schedule is, you know, we used to do Monday through Friday, but now we do start Tuesday. So my goal is to do Tuesday through Saturday. We're gonna try to stick to that as much as we reasonably can. So yeah, we'll do some dev, some weekend dev. Yeah, move forward a day. Yeah, basically, I still want to, I still want to do 5 days a week. And it's kind of cool. There's a little offset. So like, there's a day I stream that I don't work my day job, and there's a day I work my day job that I don't stream. So it kind of gives me these like 2 half days, and then like Sunday is my like full, like I don't do anything Sunday, except this co-working Godot meetup that I like to attend. You forgot what I was working on. I'm still working on this FTL, faster than light kind of thing. It's kind of like a space game. We're really just working on the tools and stuff to make it. We really don't have the game going yet. Right now we've kind of we're working on a lot of the underlying framework stuff, and all we've really got working is our little tile map builder, where we can kind of where we got an auto tiler and we can kind of just make what would eventually be like some good looking ship shapes, but right now they're just like concrete blocks. So we can add on to it, put a roof over it, add some doors. It is all separate, so we can rotate it, which I think is kind of snazzy. Still don't love this semi-transparent door thing we've got going. We need to come up with a different solution. And so we build out these ships like layer by layer. Sunday is the day for getting drunk and binging random shows. That's a good use of time, for sure. Reminds you of Half-Life doors? Nice. Yeah, everyone's kind of got Half-Life on the mind, huh? That 20th anniversary. Ferlansky, Mrs. and you are full of flu. So hyped to see an Iliad stream right now. Hell yeah. I mean, not hell yeah for the flu. Sorry about that. My partner's also quite ill, so if you hear... Yeah, that in the background. She's very sorry, but it's okay. It's not your fault for being sick. It's kind of the season. There was a big storm that blew through here, and it's been really cold and rainy. I think it's been getting a lot of people sick. But yeah, the Half-Life 2 anniversary, the 20th anniversary. I just watched the documentary yesterday. It was so good. Kind of want to go back and watch the Half-Life documentary now. Although Half-Life 2 was way more meaningful to me than Half-Life 1. So that's kind of what we've got going. That's not really what we're working on, per se. You just played Half-Life for the first time? Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, they just updated Half-Life 2, so... I presume you've played Half-Life 2, but maybe not. Yeah, that's why everyone's talking about Half-Life, exactly. What we're doing now is we're just coding up this framework for the game. It's going to be like an entity component framework. Entity component system. Or HL2. It's classic. Half-Life 2 is like very, very influential to me. Half-Life 1 less so. But Half-Life 2 was a really big... HL2 looks so good. I know, it still looks good, and part of it is because they use the source engine So they're able to like backport a lot of improvements that they made in the episodes, which were like the miniature sequels to Half-Life 2. So they were able to make some like improvements to the visuals over the following years, which is pretty rare, I think, in games. You don't normally get like backported visual improvements to a game from its like sequels. It's pretty unusual. But they've been really good. And they did an update just recently for the 20th anniversary that probably makes it even better. So yeah, I want to go back and play it too. It's probably been five plus years since I've played it last. Probably longer, honestly. All right, so what we've been working on now is rerouting some functionality through the archetype so that it's easier for them to keep track of what's going on. Oh, thanks for the hydrate. I have been exclusively drinking coffee this morning, so some water would probably be good.
He's dead, Jim.
He is. Yeah, I've started adding some audio effects.
Maximum more.
Yeah. It's for people when they have commentary on what I'm doing. All right, so what we did yesterday is we introduced the functionality of adding entities to archetypes. We should probably add the functionality to remove the entity. You'll lurk? Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the lurk. Thanks for the lurk, Bong Rip. So we'll borrow the functionality from down here in the chunk lists. Oh, we don't need to do this anymore. So we call this from the archetype. We say chunklist.add component entity. We pass. We don't pass any. Well, no, we do pass a type. So we can get rid of this line because we're doing this ahead of time now. Chunk is independently keeping track of its item count, which I don't love. But it's probably good in that if someone hands you a chunk and you don't know anything else about where it's come from, that you can just process all the items in the chunk. It's probably the best here. So we got rid of that one line that was duplicated functionality. And same deal here. We can essentially do the same thing. So remove entity is like chunk lists. Well, we actually This isn't quite right, is it? Oh no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Well, no, it's not. Because whether we add the new chunk or not, we need to increment the item count for each of the chunks, right? No, and not unless we, yeah, I don't know. There's a conflict in keeping track of the number up here and also down in each of the lists. There's a bit of a conflict. All right, let's check the integrity of our adding an entity for now. So if we want to create an entity, do this. Create an entity and we give the composition of that entity. We get the next entity ID. Getting the next entity ID involves either, if there's an entity that we can recycle, we'll recycle one. Otherwise, we'll create a new one, a new entity ID. That stuff's all good. All right, so recycling or creating the entity is fine. We get the entity ID back here. Then we call into the archetype that's going to house it, and we ask it to add the entity. This is maybe where it gets a little weird. So the archetype goes through to add the entity. It checks to see if its chunks are full. And so, if it is full, we go through the chunk list, every chunk list in our set of chunk lists, and we add a chunk. This is probably where we need to increment the chunk. We probably need to say, because even though the values aren't initialized yet, we need to acknowledge that there's now going to be an item that's stored in there. We need to say something. Yeah, instead of declaring it with iMemory and 0, we need to declare it with 1. Because I think our principle is we're never going to allow empty chunks to exist. If a chunk's item count goes down to 0, we destroy it. And so if we add a new chunk, it's implied that we are storing something there. Although, are we handling that here with add component? Yeah, we are handling that here with add component. Maybe this needs to be a set component and not an add. Or I don't know. I guess we can make assumptions. What I'm trying to avoid is having one chunk with an item count of 1 and all of the other chunks having an item count of 0. Because that's going to cause a desynchronization, which is not good. Could go through the motions and just pass in a bunch of default values for each component. Because the way we wrote add component here is more for moves. Although no, we do that here. So maybe we just need to change how this works. Maybe add component works differently than add component from. Yeah, so we could have an add entity. No, that doesn't work. Maybe we just move the assignment into here. Or we just have a separate loop that we only have to do once. We could just have an else. We could say if else. We'd have to keep track of which one's the entity ID. I don't love this. I don't love this. I don't love how we've set this up. Because we need to add the entity ID component, but then we have a bunch of other components that we don't need to add, but we need to make sure that the chunks know that there should be an entity there. I think we rewrite this as a set component. Oh, hey pandas. Happy Saturday. Yes, indeed. How's it going? How'd you weather the storm yesterday? Good, stayed inside all day? Yeah, same. I enjoyed watching it from outside. So we have the t value. We need to know where we're setting the... Yeah, I don't think we're going to end up having this add component function. It's too weird. Because we can initialize the chunk. I mean, we could do a couple of things. We could have a loop, and we could say we could have an increment count. Or we could just be honest and set this component value. So we need a destination chunk, a destination index, and a t value. Let's just treat it as a set component. There's no real reason to pass this through the chunk list then, in that case. We can just send it straight to the component type. You can just do it. The only reason we had it as an add was for different reasons here. Add component and add component from, I think, are still useful. But we don't need it in this specific workflow. This workflow, where we're adding an entity, we're just going to say we're just going to say component type entity ID, add component, and we'll get the chunk. We'll say it's chunk lists and component dot flags dot or component dot types dot entity ID. Oh, component type. Is that entity? Oh, it's component.type.flags.entity ID. So we just get the list for that, and we get dot chunks. We get the last one here. No, because I'm only considering the case where we're adding a brand new chunk and then populating it. We need a way of incrementing the item count for every chunk. Maybe we just have a private function here, like increment count. I don't know. Let's do this. So let's store this variable chunk is we get the latest chunk. We'll store that. Actually, we don't need to store this. When we do add a chunk, we are going to initialize it with an item count of 0. And what we'll do here, pass in the chunk, we give it entity count divided by, actually we want to store this number, variable, say index, actually what is this? This is like, let's just call it remainder. Store this, because we need this. Because the remainder gives us the index into the first available chunk. So we grab the last chunk, we pass in the remainder. And the entity ID. And then we need to do something else here. Which is we need to increment all of the others. Okay, maybe we do pass this down into the chunk list and it can handle this for us. Instead of doing it this way. It's easier probably for the chunk list to do its own housekeeping than to try to do it down from... Oh no, we can't have it on the chunk list because we need to do it to all of them. When I get values back from a dictionary, I wonder how they're sorted. I could probably sort them. What is this? What does it sort by? Does it sort? It's not sortable. It should be. It should be sortable by its type flag, because that way we would always have the entity come up first, right? I wonder how we get that back. What we're going to just do is we're going to iterate through every chunk, or every chunk list, grab the last chunk, and then just increment its item count. That's how we'll do this. It's pretty easy. Equals chunk list dot chunks with item count is item count plus 1. Oh, that doesn't, we don't have that. So this should be fine. So we're just going through every chunk list and incrementing the item count of the last chunk in the list. Just to acknowledge that there is a space there, even though none of those values have been initialized yet. And we'll have to initialize them in a separate pass. Only value we're going to initialize is the entity ID itself. I mean, we could even forego that, but that seems like not a good idea. We could potentially forego that and set all components later. Actually, that might be what we eventually do. Honestly. In which case, we can kind of leave this in a kind of a weird in-between space. Let's leave it like this for now. Actually, we don't need to do this chunk list.chunks.item count plus 1. We can just give it remainder. Right? No. It'd be remainder plus 1. Okay, so that's adding an entity. Now we got to think about removing an entity. When we do a remove of an entity, we really don't need to clean anything up. We just need to get rid of our reference to it. In the same way, we really don't need to be assigning the entity ID here. Well, I guess we do if we're trying to store the entity indices. So that we know where we're supposed to be. We could always just... Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we have like an initialize entity function. No, we can't do it. The reason we're not able to do these in one big function is because we need to pass through the values, the initial values for all of these different components. And the only people, quote unquote people, the only things that know all of those components and what they're going to be and actually be able to operate on them concretely are the systems. So the systems are going to need an ability to do that. So it's not even going to be able to be like an abstract function or an abstract type. Like we're not going to be able to have a system type that understands all of this stuff. This is really going to be per system. It's really gonna be per system functionality that understands the concrete types involved. Sorry for all the background noise. My partner is sick. Probably should have just skipped, but I was like, I'm gonna stream on Saturday. Gonna do it because I said I would do it. So if I'm a little quiet, it's probably because I'm just muting so that we don't have to, so I don't assault your ears with all the background coughing and other unsavory sounds. I appreciate everyone hanging out on a Saturday. I guess removing an entity is kind of involved because we need to do the backfill stuff. We need to do the backfill stuff, which we were previously doing here on the chunk list, which we still do. So we'll still probably just call remove component at chunks dot remove at. Oh, I see. We don't need to do this here. I mean, we could. All right, so when we're doing the removal, we really just go through each chunk list and call remove component at. And then at the end, we do our check. So we can get rid of this. Maybe we have just a chunk address and it's actually just the chunk and then the index into it. Maybe we do it that way because I'm constantly passing through a chunk and an index, and I kind of just want to pass a single thing. Probably just call it an entity address. Well, an entity address wouldn't be chunk specific. I guess that's why we just pass the index, huh? Okay. Yeah, I understand. I understand now. So we're just going to say for each chunk list and chunk list dot values, we're going to say chunk list dot remove component at, and it's going to be entity. Let's store this. Entity indices is entity indices entity ID. Say entity. Let's not make this one line probably. Well, let's see if it fits. Oh, we need to grab the chunk. This is gonna be too long to be one line. So it's gonna be chunk list dot chunks entity indices dot interchunk. So we get the chunk. Say okay, here's our remove component at. Just do that for each chunk list. Then I'll handle it. Okay, and so maybe we let the component or the chunk lists manage their own stuff here. I think this extra loop is unnecessary. Maybe we just do the checkout here so we can manage some things. I don't know. I think looping through this just to add chunks and then looping through it again is like kind of not great. I think having the chunk list maintain this stuff themselves is probably the correct thing to do. Maybe instead of calling it add component, I call it something like reserve component, because it's not actually... Maybe I call it like reserve space or something like that, or reserve index. Because we're not actually setting anything at this phase. We're just reserving a spot. Maybe that's what we call it. Instead of add component, we call it something like reserve space. Reserve slot, maybe. Something like that. In which case we don't even need to tell it what kind of slot it is. We just have each list do that. Make it super simple like this, where we just reserve the top spot. Probably also call this reserve first available slot instead of just add entity. I feel like add entity is super misleading. Although I don't know, maybe add entity is fine. Maybe we call it add uninitialized entity. So people don't think you can just do this. I mean, again, I'm maybe being too strict because, like, I'm the only person using this code. So, like, but future may not remember some of the, like, the little weird little... That always happens where you're like, it's clear enough. And then you come back to it, like, 6 months later and you're like, why is this thing dependent on this thing? Like, why is this order dependent? It doesn't look like it should be. And it's like, well, technically, the underlying implementation is such that if you do this without doing this first... everything explodes. And it's like, well, that's not very clear. So I think specifying that we're adding this entity in a way that's uninitialized. Maybe we should just call it reserve space for entity. I don't know, I kind of like reserve first available slot. Makes it feel like it's a setup step. It's not like anything else. Then it's a lot more reasonable to iterate through once and occasionally add this value here. Because we're not going to set the component straight away. We're just going to iterate through. We're going to occasionally iterate through and add chunks. Most of the time, we're just going to iterate through once and reserve spots. This is not correct. We don't need to do this part anymore, right? Part of the reserve process is this. It's literally just this. You just increment the item count for each chunk that is reserving a spot. Why can't this be an expression body? Just doing one thing. We don't need to do this. We do need to iterate through and say chunk list chunks I. You need to say reserve first available. Oh no, not chunks. We just need to say chunk list. Chunk list dot reserve first available slot. And then here we can add to the entity indices this new entity ID. We can guarantee that this space has been reserved at entity count. Oh, it's not entity count. It's entity count. Entity count. It's remainder. This is chunk index. Entity count plus plus. First available slot. First available slot. No, this isn't the first available slot. This is the number of. This is how many times we can divide the count, or how many times what's the remainder of dividing the entity count by the max items per chunk. So if it's 0, that means all the chunks are full. So I kind of want to store this here somewhere. Okay, so if it comes out to 0, we know that the entity thing is full, but that still makes this the first available slot because it's 0. It's the first available slot on a new index, so we can't call it this. First available slot, and then we pass that in here. I think it's a little questionable to do this post increment in this when we're evaluating it, but it's like the easiest place to do it. Because we'll get the value, then it'll be incremented. We'll get the value, we'll get this calculation, and then it will be incremented, right? That's how that works? Pretty sure that's how a post increment works. I usually am not so cheeky that I try to use it in a statement like this, but I like doing it this way rather than just going all the way down to the bottom and being like, entity count plus plus. I'd rather just do it while I'm doing something else. And if I can't do it that way, I'd rather just do this, just chunks per list plus equals 1. Okay, so this works so far. He says, not having tested any of this out in weeks. But, you know, in theory, it works so far. We got ads coming up in a minute. I don't know if we're going to do anything for that. I'm going to fix my camera very quickly. I live in this very, very small middle ground between my green screen here. That should be good. Oh, we're in the ad break. Yeah, I'll be back in a couple minutes. Maybe. I mean, not maybe. Like, it'll probably just be a minute or two. I'll be right back. We're in ads on the Twitch side. Thanks for everyone hanging out. All right, we're back. All right. So we're reasonably happy with this reserve first available slot deal. We need to set this up here. So yeah, create an entity. So we reserve the first available slot for this entity. We add that to the archetype by entity IDs. That has broken our add component. Oh, we need this add component function. Because when you add a component to an entity, you're using a mix of add component from with add component, because you're copying stuff over from the old archetype, but you're also adding something new. So we need to go re-implement our add component function. Oops. Should have looked at the usages list. That's why there's a usages list here. I could have seen who was depending on this. I think it is just this t value. And then you just do something like this. You basically do this. There's no source chunk, so we're not doing a move, we're just doing a set component. Doing a component type T, set component. We need to define what T is. T is unmanaged. That's really the only constraint on T. What does set component take? Takes a chunk and an index and a value. Easy. All right, we're all good. We might get rid of this add chunk check. I'm not sold on this. It's a little weird how we do it differently here. It's weird how we have a remove entity function, but not an add entity. But that may change. But our remove entity is much more clear. So we do this, we grab the entity indices, go through the chunk lists, we remove component at that value. We reduce the entity count. The remove component at stuff is doing that by itself. Move component at is no longer doing its chunk stuff. You don't want to add that back in, this part, which is the if. How did we do it here? So we'd say if chunks 1.item count is 0, then what we do is we say chunks we dispose of it. We say remove chunk. Or we can just say remove chunks. Or remove chunk. Oh shoot. We have a raid, everybody. Red alert. Raise the shields. Repel borders. We got a raid coming in from JD Does Dev. JD, how's it going? How was your stream today? Summon the archers. Yeah. Our space archers. Hey CCPRN. Desist dawdling. Going well, how about me? It's okay, we got a lazy Saturday stream here going. We're working on our entity component system, which we're foolishly making for our FTL-like style game here. So for anyone who's coming in for the first time, we're trying to work on a kind of spiritual successor to FTL Faster Than Light. We've got kind of more of an isometric side-on view here. That's our art style. So we've got more of a 3D game board that we're working with than FTL. CCPRN, thank you for the follow. Really appreciate that. I don't think anything's broken, so I think I can show kind of the world we're working with. So we're building up these ships out of these basic blocks here. We've got, it's an isometric 2D game, so we've got like individual 2D faces that we're combining together to make these 3D isometric looking structures. Right now we can only, the auto tiler only knows how to build this. Oh, Tommy L. Bro and Desist Dawdling, thank you both for the follow. We're working on adding more complex shapes in like this, but this is a little harder. So while I've drawn these, right now we can only really build with this plus some doors. I'll kind of show you what the shipbuilding looks like right now. It's really primitive. Oh, you got OAuth working. Wow, that's awesome. I never mess with anything approaching network stuff. So trying to do network security is like the scariest thing in the world to me. So you can kind of see our auto tiler can handle these shapes and handle the outlining and stuff like that. We can go down to the next level here and kind of build out shapes. So we can build this room out. And we have the auto tiler works. It works on homogeneous textures, so it's like it can tell the difference between interior walls, exterior walls, interior I don't know what you'd call these, but like basically like entombed walls that are just like these dark gray bits. Looks pretty neat. Thank you. Don't show us the door. Desist, you are working on a new game with someone and they want an isometric view. It'd be nice seeing what you're doing. Oh yeah, for sure. Your jaw may have dropped. Do I have a YouTube? Yes. Right now we're multi-streaming to YouTube actually. So there should be a YouTube link on my channel page on Twitch. Here are the doors. I said I was going to show you the doors. This is it. We can also auto tile the doors. So you'll notice there's like a single door and we can make it a double door. So the auto tiler kind of just understands block space. It understands these 3D blocks, and then it tries to fill in whatever looks most appropriate. We can also rotate. So it's like this isn't the game data. This is like a rendering view into the game data. We can kind of keep going too if we wanted. So we could keep making more rooms. All right, you need to raid and run. No worries. Thank you, JD. Really appreciate the raid here. Hope you have a great weekend. How? I'll show you why this isn't isometric first. And then we can kind of dig into how a little bit. Which would maybe be kind of good. I haven't really looked at the GD script code here in a while. So firstly, differences. This isn't isometric exactly. So this is isometric. This here, I refer to it as 2x1 because if you're drawing a straight line in isometric, it goes over by 2 pixels and then up by 1. So you get this this look. We're doing what's technically called dimetric. It's about half as tall. It's about half as like, you know, the camera is just 50% lower about. So it's more of a side-on view. I'm doing that because I have a hard time drawing characters in isometric. You notice they're a bit differently organized. Yeah. So my characters are kind of drawn side-on. So we end up with kind of a picture book aesthetic. Because if we have like a crew member, here's a little like fight sequence I mocked up recently. So they're very side on. So if we got someone running here. So I need this more side on. I need the dimetric view so that this stuff kind of matches better. Pretty rough art stuff so far. I actually am more of a programmer than an artist, so. I can show you kind of how I've got the auto tiling works. You can kind of see here we basically got, oops. Get out of here. We basically got tile set. If I wanted you to show up every time I click this, I would tell you to. Do this maybe? So we've got 6 layers that we're building on. And if you look at an individual level, you can't see anything here, but it's basically, why can't you see anything here? If we look at a hall, we look at a deck level. Okay, so yeah, they're stacked differently. Each deck, so a hall consists of like 6 decks, and each deck consists of like a bunch of different layers. You get that for sure? Never heard of this view. Yeah, no, that's cool. Right now, we basically have separate layers for each face of the wall and the floor, because I tried initially doing it where we treated the basic building block as this thing, and the combinatorics got insane. Like, if you kind of look at this, so here's like all the different hull combinations we've got. We've got these dark gray interior spaces, these mid-tone gray exterior spaces, and these light gray like compartments. This would be like an atmospheric compartment. So we've got all these different kinds of tile types. And then if you combine that with the outlining, you get this. You basically get an atlas set that looks like this, which is just this insane amount of variety. Because each of these has all these different faces that contribute to the outlining. So the combinatoric explosion of trying to do this auto tiler where the building block was the individual block itself, like, didn't work. So we switched to this system where each layer just handles one side. And then we build them up in the auto tiler. And the auto tiler can look at floors, it can look at walls, it can look at doors. It looks at basically everything and tries to compare them between each other. I don't know if I have a good view into the code per se. Weavin is mainly responsible for this. Each layer is kind of responsible in its own way. So like the floor layer goes through this process where it figures out all of the hull types that belong to it. And then it goes through and it gets the atlas coordinates in the tile set. So we've split the tile set up into these different groups. So we've got like, we've broken it up so that like here down here are all the floors, the sides of the floors. Here's like the top of the floors. Here's like the sides of the wall. And here's like the top of the wall. You'll notice that the top of the floor and the top of the wall use the same sprites, but they have different offsets based because of where they spawn in. So yeah, we've kind of, the only exception are the doors are just like the doors themselves. I haven't split them up into each of their individual faces. I might have to at some point, but right now it seems fine. But yeah, so we have a crazy custom auto tiler in 4.3 that takes all these tile layers and basically handles an arbitrary number of tile layers to build our little isometric building, our little isometric build here. But yeah, if you're not on 4.3, if you're in Godot and you're not on 4.3, get on 4.3 because the new tile map layer sprite is what you want to be, or the new tile map layer node is what you want to be using. You don't want to use the old tile map node. The new tile map layer node is so much better because it treats each layer of the tile map as a discrete node in the scene tree. So it handles the Z indexing way better than the old one does. But yeah, you can kind of see the auto tiler in action here where it hides, it only generates outlines, the black outlines in between the boundaries of homogeneous shapes. So like the dark gray, any two dark gray tiles don't have outlines between them. They only have outlines where they join either empty space or another surface, like the mid-tone gray or the light tone gray. The other thing you definitely want to think about with isometric is visibility. Because like if you're doing a regular isometric, you only block one tile with each tile in front of it. What I'm doing, I needed this cutaway system because each wall blocks the 3 tiles behind it. In terms of visibility, it blocks the 3 floor tiles behind it, so I needed a cutaway system. You might not need one if you're just doing regular isometric stuff. You really, really appreciate this, or can appreciate it. You have an idea for a game, and this would be a brilliant system to use. Jumping in. Oh, yeah, please join the Discord if you want to ask questions, share your progress. Would love that. There's also a link to that on the Twitch page. I think I have one on my link tree, which there's a link to on the YouTube. But yeah, please. I would love to see some other takes on isometric work in Godot. Apologies for any background noise here. Gotta wall this in or it's not gonna look right. There we go. Oh. Thanks for hanging out, Raiders. Thanks for JD again for hopping in here. Ooh, there's a weird bug here. Oh no, it's not a bug. Well, it is. That's a weird one. All right, spotted a bug. I'm not going to deal with it now, though. We're doing something kind of radical with our system, which is where we have all of that stuff that we've done up in GDScript. We're moving most of the game state into C# land. So I'm working on a little entity component system for representing our game state, and that's kind of what we've been working on. Thanks for taking the time out to explain it. You'll be lurking while you do some homework? No, thank you. Thank you for expressing interest. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate the lurk. All right, so what we're dealing with now is adding and removing components from their adding and removing entities from their archetype. It's a little tricky because when you add an entity, it's actually totally uninitialized, so I'm kind of thinking of a different approach for it, which we just knocked up. Now I'm working on removing the entities. And I don't think by remove entity we mean like we're removing them to another archetype. I think we're talking remove in the sense of like straight delete all this stuff. But we could do this differently. I guess it's the same either way from our end. It's just we're just removing it from the archetype. So we might actually use this code for both purposes. All right, so we're removing everything in each chunk. At the moment, the chunk lists handle their own cleanup. All right, so we do a removal. This handles up all the internal clearing of things. We don't need to do it the same way as we do up here. We don't need to actually check to see if we need to add a new chunk. The removing of the chunk will be handled separately, but what we do need to do is we need to check to see if that occurred. So we need to say if minus minus entity count. So we pre-decrement it, and then we see if the remainder from the max items per chunk is 0. So if we're basically left with an empty component or an empty chunk afterwards, we just want to say chunks per list minus equal 1. Pretty straightforward here. So we're tracking the entity count within the archetype, which is kind of useful. Field can be made. Yeah, that could be read-only. Okay, so that's one more thing settled. So if we're removing an entity, which we have here somewhere, we have create entity. We call it remove, or should we call it like destroy or something? Destroy is not great. Call it like deactivate. I just call it destroy. Oh, we don't need to do that. It could be just void, destroy entity, DID. So to destroy an entity, we go backwards here. We say, so we get the archetype. Get the archetype. No, we can get the archetype by, we get the archetype by entity ID here. Get our archetype, and then we say remove entity. Entity ID. We remove our entity from the archetype. Then we do some other things here. We need to swap our entity with the first or with the last living entity. And we need to clean up a couple of references. So we can say, so we can remove from the archetype, we can say, we can archetype, yeah, that's easy. And then what we're gonna do here is we need to swap. We need to do a swap. We aren't doing this swap. Are we doing the swap in the recycle entities? Yeah, we should be. So for recycling entity ID, we grab the entity ID's entity live count. Oh, no, we don't need to do a swap. We're just grabbing the first unalive one and using that. So this is, so with this we need to swap with the last alive one. So what's the last one that's alive here? So we've got entity IDs. Where are we keeping track of this? Oh yeah, the entity live count. Probably call this live entities count or something like that. Just call it live entities. So we need to swap places with the entity here. So we should have like a swap entities. Should have like a swap entity function, probably. Although, are we ever going to use that outside of this context? Probably not. So let's just do it. Let's just write it in here for now. So to swap an entity, that involves changing the entity ID by index dictionary. It involves just this dawdling. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Yeah, true. It's true. Try not to go too clean code on this, but it's still good to have. Like the first iteration of any of this kind of stuff should be rough, it should be approximate, it should be not much more than you need because you're going to change it. So like over engineering the design of it is not something we're trying to do right off the bat, but it's still good to have if it's easy. We can always write the functionality and then encapsulate it later somewhere. Okay, so what order do I need to do this in? Is there any kind of interference? We probably need to store the other entity ID, huh? Let's just do that. That's easy. So let's say other ID is entity, or is entity IDs live entities -1. So it's the last of the living entities. In all fairness, you're new and have no idea how deep you are in this. We've only been working on the entity component system for this for maybe a couple weeks. It's pretty rough. It's kind of a weird thing to be doing in Godot, to be making our own entity component system that doesn't interact with the Godot API, but we kind of have an idea about having the game state be just in a separate world to the Godot API in most cases, so that we are free to do a lot of simulation without having to mess with the scene tree very much. A lot of off-screen simulation. All right, so we've got our other ID. We need to put the other ID where we were. We basically just need to swap places. So let's write it out, and then yeah, we'll see if we want a function for that. So we have our ID and we have the other ID, so we can do it. So we can say, let's say, entity IDs by index. DID.index equals other ID. So we put the other ID here. And we swap places. So entity IDs, entity ID by index, other ID, other ID dot index equals entity ID. Okay, so we've swapped places in the entity IDs array. We need to rewrite the entity ID by index for it equals entity ID by index, entity ID dot index. Trying to keep this all straight. This is a whole mess right here. I want to make sure we're not swapping things out in the wrong order. This dictionary name is terrible. It's basically an index lookup. I'm gonna call this something else. It's gonna be something like dense index by sparse index. Maybe we say lookup by entity ID index. So we're basically mapping from the sparse index, which is the entity ID's actual index, to the dense index, which is like where the entity is in the entity ID list. I'm gonna call it dense index by sparse index for now, because that's explicitly what it is. I don't know if I like that naming convention in the long term, but I guess I shouldn't say by sparse index because it's just implied that the entity_id.index is the sparse index. I should probably change it to something like dense index by entity ID dot index. I don't know. It's terrible. I hate this kind of stuff. I hate this kind of lookup system, but it helps. It helps for exactly this case to have it. So we actually want to reverse these because we want to say so we're going to set the dense index for the other ID to wherever the other ID, the other entity used to be. They're swapping places here. That's easy. And then here we need to swap references or swap indexes. And I don't think we want to do it in this order. I think we want to set our index becomes, actually this is fine because we can say our index becomes live entities -1. I think this is right. This looks right. So we get the other ID, the other entity ID, by looking up whatever the last living entity is. We swap the parameter entity ID that we passed in with the other ID. We swap them both. Then we need to change the lookups. So this is the lookup, the dense index lookup. I should probably just call it dense index lookup. So the dense index lookup for the other entity becomes this entity's index. Or whatever, it was the result for this ID. So we're swapping the results here. And then for this one, we're just setting this one to live entities -1 because that's its new address. And so that's the swap. And then what we need to do is we just need to reduce the live entities count. So we've killed one of these. Can I do this in such a way without reference to the live entities -1? And the answer is yes if I do this in the opposite order. Right? No, there's no way to do this without destroying some information here. Yeah, that's fine. So that destroys our entity and fills in the gap left by it. We've decided that we want to increment the version number when we recycle the entity, so we're not going to do it immediately. Let's call this live entities count. I don't want to confuse it and make it sound like it's like an array of the entities that are alive. Okay, so that's creating and removing entities. We can create entities, we can destroy entities, we can recycle entities. That's all we need to do from that front. Need to get back to components now. Should I be doing get component type instead of just straight up calling into component type.types? Probably. In which case I would want to put get component type on the component anyway. And I would make component types private. Can I do that? What error did that cause? Oh. Oh, then I can't declare it from here. Oh, that's stupid. Yeah, whatever. That's fine. Okay, we can allegedly add and remove components as well. I feel like we were stuck on something, which is why I went over to the entity part for a little while to just get a better idea of how I wanted to structure this. Like if I wanted to ask the archetype to do this. I didn't want to because this add component function involves moving all of an entity's information from one archetype to another. So I didn't want to put that down in one of the two archetypes. I wanted to kind of orchestrate that from above. But there is some... I could just say source archetype, like add component from, and then pass in the, or I could say destination archetype, add component from source archetype. Like I could take this part could do that. That could be let's try structuring it that way. I would call it something like maybe add entity with component. This doesn't really matter. We've got the functionality here already. What was my hang up with this? Let's read through it and see what issue I was. Probably had something to do with this. So we go through, we remove this entity from the source archetype's entity indices. Okay. We go through each source chunk in the source archetype. We add component from. the source archetype. Then we remove component at the source archetype for each chunk. And then the destination archetype, we add the component with this value. Then all we need to do now is introduce the entity indices for this. And we need to know, we need to know this information. That's why I wanted to push it down to the archetype, so we could use the entity count. I see. Then remove component. Do we have a similar problem? No, because we just call the remove component at and then handles a lot of this. Yeah, maybe we should. Maybe we should. This is kind of like a terrible structure I've arrived at. Because like a normal entity component system would just have like one entity manager that's kind of like godlike and just does all of the changes itself. That's kind of what world is to me, but world is really where the information is stored, sort of. But because of how we've kind of devolved that storage down through some classes, like the archetype class and the chunk list class, it's a little weirder. We're also using a structure of arrays when we could have tried using an array of structures. I think that would have been way harder, so I'm glad we're not doing that. Because we would need a structure for each like composition, and that would be like we'd be using like templates with like source generators and stuff. That would be not good. Probably be easier in a lot of senses, but it would be a lot less flexible. All right, let's try out an add component that we execute through the archetype. Maybe what we do is we say copy entity and then add component. That's not great though. I don't know. I like having it here on the world because it accounts for the fact that each archetype Like, obviously, the archetype we're copying to has full information about what we're doing. But the archetype we're copying from is like missing. In either case, one of the archetypes doesn't know about all the types that are involved. It doesn't know about all the components involved. So we need a way of filtering. I mean, we could just do a if composition flag matches, like if your flags match our flags, like if we have all the flags, and if we don't have the flag, the specific flag that you have, we don't do it. It's kind of hard to do a flag comparison like that though, because we have one flag comparison, which is this, which is like for component flags for each element in the enum. So we get the values in the enum, like all the values that the enum could represent. And then we go through that and we see if this element has this flag. We could just do this. We could iterate through the source composition and then say, if the destination composition has this one, do that. And we could do the vice versa as well. That wouldn't be too bad. That'd be okay. Kind of waffling around very similar functionality and just deciding where we want to place that functionality so that it's easier for these classes to like clean up their internal components. I'm tempted to pass most things through the archetype because that makes sense, the most sense to me. Also, our paradigm involves adding a single component. It doesn't involve adding multiple components, which we'll have to decide how we want to handle that, because sometimes you might add multiple components in a single pass. So we need to handle that a little differently, but we can cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. No reason to go crazy. Try to do it all in advance. I would like to sort this stuff out though, because once we have the adding and removing of the components and the entities, we really just need to handle queries, which is like the ability to get all of the component data that you want for entities that have the compositions, or even just the fragmented compositions that you want. Like, give me all the entities with positions, stuff like that. That's going to be the big final task before we have a working entity component system. With an optional thing to do later of adding a buffer, a command buffer. Because right now our entity component system is single-threaded because it doesn't have a command buffer. So we can't like buffer actions that would make structural changes and then only do those at certain times. But I'm not super concerned with that at the moment. We do have a set of ads coming. So we'll probably take a quick break when those hit. And then come back and rewrite some of this add and remove component stuff on the archetype. Appreciate everyone hanging out, everyone who came over with the raid, everyone who's came out over since then, everyone who was here before. Just basically everyone who's chosen to hang out with us here on this fine Saturday. Hope you're having a relaxing weekend. All right, we got ads. I'll be back in a couple minutes, guys. Thanks for hanging out.
Maximum warp.
All right, we're back. Thanks for waiting. Passing the type flag in along with the actual value feels silly. I guess that's what we have to do. Sort of, I guess. Oh, we skipped a step here. We need to... You just say entity indices dot remove entity ID. Yeah. Doodley's catch for the maximum warp. Thank you. I think I was gone for that, but I appreciate it. Fox Shadow with the Saturday question mark? Yeah, Fox. Our streaming schedule now should be technically Tuesday through Saturday. So this should be a new thing. It should be a new regular thing. Which, like, you know, I don't know how much people want a co-working stream on a Saturday, but that's what we're going to be doing. I'm hoping it'll give me a chance to hang out with some people I don't normally get to hang out here on stream. People whose like work schedule doesn't allow for them to like tune in very often. That's my hope, at least. All right, so we're rewriting this. So we're gonna say something like destination. Well, where do we get the destination archetype? Where are we declaring this? Oh, we find this. So we found this during this kind of archaic process here. We found our destination archetype, so we'll just say destination archetype dot add entity with component T entity ID I guess we want the type flag. Kind of silly to be sending both the type and the type flag over. You've been deving all morning? Nice. Nice. Yeah, this is a good reason for me to doing the dev on the Saturday, because after this I'm going to try to just hang out and do a bunch of cleaning and cooking that I did not do during the week. But we're going to keep going for a while. So void add entity with component entity ID component type dot flags type flag T value. All right, so this is how we're going to do this, I think. Can I say component T flag? Yeah, I can. Okay, so we don't need to pass the flag. We don't need to pass the flag over. So that's good to know. We can just say component passing the T. We can say component T flags. With the ship power manager in place, you've been working on splitting the rotation logic and forward thrust logic to be handled by the RCS and engine components separately. Cool. Super cool. That's really awesome. Yeah, respectively. I get what you mean. Are you gonna have... Well, I guess you don't need to. I always like when, if you're like rotational thrusters, like if you don't have the actual thrusters needed to do the rotation, you can't do it. Like I've been playing a lot of Cosmoteer, and in Cosmoteer, it feels like a ship can turn even though it doesn't have the thrusters in place to actually do the turn. Like you've blown up the thrusters that they would need to make that turn. And they can still do it, but like barely. It's kind of annoying. And like with rotation's pretty easy compared to like forward or back or side to side. Like as far as you don't need a lot of power to implement a rotation. But it kind of annoys me when I see that. I much prefer like the old Captain Forever system where like if you didn't have the thrusters to make this turn, you could not make this turn. I like that. Yeah, I guess you are recreating an original game, so you're not trying to add a bunch of functionality that wasn't in the original game. I think that's good. I think that's good. I don't know if I could resist the temptation to just start adding stuff. So do I need to know the composition of the entity ID? Or am I just gonna get... Oh no, we know our composition because we're in this our... Well, we don't know what the composition of... We don't know the composition that we're getting from where we're coming from. So that's interesting. So we'll actually say something like... variable archetype is game.world.getArchetype entity ID. So we can get the archetype of the entity ID. It's a little stupid because the world is the one that's calling this for us. We should probably just pass in the composition instead of taking these multiple steps to get there, because now we'll say composition is archetype dot. Well, what we would say is for each variable component in archetype. What? For each variable component in archetype dot composition. Almost all of this stuff is added. Oh yeah, really? You couldn't help yourself. In the OG game, mass only affected forward acceleration. It's totally not feature creep though. There was no power management in the OG game. Okay, cool. I'm not so familiar with the game that you're pulling from. That's cool though. All right, so each component in the composition, or I guess we call it element. For each element in the composition, we'll say something like type flag. We'd say if composition dot has flag type flag. Or can't we call has flag? Oh, we'd say composition dot. How are we gonna say that? Composition dot elements. I see. Let's add a function maybe. I feel like maybe we shouldn't say element. Maybe we should just say component. I think it's weird. I like the word element, but I feel like it's confusing. Let's try to be clear. Say components. We say component flags. Fox Shadow, subscribe with Prime. Thank you so much, Fox. Really appreciate that. Thanks for beaming aboard here. Thanks for making the leap from YouTube to Twitch. You should probably watch on Twitch. It's just nicer on Twitch. Or not Twitch. It's nicer on YouTube. The quality is just so much higher. Playlist is in the chat here. Oh yeah. If you're ever wondering what music we're playing, Pretzel Rocks does post the songs in the chat. So I guess that's a good reason to be on Twitch. I don't think I'm really using the 4K resolution anyway, so it's probably fine watching this in a largest component size. Oh, I made this so long. It's fine. All right, so We get all of this stuff. I was going to add a helper function here. That's what I was going to do before I just got preoccupied renaming things. Oh, we were going to say something like has component. We're going to have like a helper function like has component. Let's say public bool has component. Yeah, it's so easy. So now we just say if composition dot has component. So if we have this component, we'll do something. Oh, we should have all of these, shouldn't we? Is there more of a reason why we're doing this? Friendly reminder to update your website with your new streaming schedule. Yeah, I do need to do that. That website is old. I think I set that up like just before GDC earlier this year. I need to change some links. I need to change some links on there. Change the stream time. Probably add a link to the itch page for the jams. I don't know. It still says the game's name is going to be Digital Iliad, which is like, that's kind of just become my name now. That's kind of become the brand name. But I don't really want to say working title. I could say something like a new game by Digital Iliad. Okay, why am I doing this check? This check doesn't make sense. Oh, we're doing it because if we're adding an entity with this component, the source thing doesn't have that component. Right. So what we do is then we say... I should call this other archetype or I'm going to get confused. So we'd say other, we'd say how does the chunk list system do this? We say add component from. So we need to send a source chunk and a source index. I don't want to make it move component to so that it handles the cleanup automatically. So we have like remove component to. That's what we had before, but now we call it remove component at. Hey Symbol, How goes Iliad? It goes well. How's your jam project remake going? Are you doing any new jams this weekend? I feel like we're spoiled for jam options coming up. I feel like there's a lot of jams coming up. I mean, Tobu Jam is going on right now. Fun Jam, I think, is going on, maybe. There's a lot going on. I'm trying to just keep my head down and not get distracted by all the jam options that I have available to me. Your next jam is Solo Dev 6? All right. That's probably wise. And that's in December, I think. I'm pretty sure. So you're just working on remaking one of your last jam games? Rebuilding it a little bit? Then the Indie Dev Jam in Jan. Oh, yeah. I was looking at that. It's so long. It's like the 17th to the 31st or something crazy like that. It's like this long thing. I don't know how I'm going to swing that, but I want to. Making more data fun stuff. Cool. Well, happy Saturday. 2 weeks. Yeah, that's so long for me. As someone who's like a 2 or 3 day jammer, I admittedly panic a little bit when I see a 2-week jam. Because I don't know how to regulate my activity so that I'd only work on it like a little bit. I want to do it, but I need to figure out if I can swing that with my schedule. I've spent weeks on this entity component system, and this really slowed down my game dev schedule here. You're in a team for the indie dev one? That's probably what I should try to do. Just try to find a team where I can contribute a little bit without having to like be super committed to it. All right, so how do I want to do this? So the way we're doing this is we're calling the destination, we're saying destination archetype add entity with this component. Maybe we should say, so we call the add entity with component on the destination archetype, and then the destination archetype calls into the source archetype to move the information over. And then the source archetype can just take care of all of its stuff. It can just handle up the cleanup on its own and move all the information over. That's tempting. Because what I don't want to do is like call an add from the destination and then call a remove on the source, like here. I don't want to do that here. I want to try to make it as like atomic a movement as possible. So what we can do is we can say instead of calling this other, we can call this the source archetype. So we're the destination. Source archetype. And yeah, let's call it on the individual. I mean, we don't need to do this. We don't need to do this thing here. We could actually just call into the source archetype and be like, give us this stuff. And then we add the thing that we need to, and then we add the entity, the component ourselves. I'm tempted to do it that way instead of do this flag comparison thing. So how would we refer that? We would say that as like remove entity 2. So that implies that we're removing the entity, but we are placing it somewhere. Public void remove entity 2. Entity ID, archetype, destination. Maybe we say archetype source. Maybe we just pass that in. And so we get here, instead of doing this nonsense, do this a little differently. We say source dot remove entity 2. We say entity ID. We say this. And then here, what we do is we say for each variable chunk list in chunk lists dot values. Ooh, this is quite a name. Le Pigeon Guiton Massif. Thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Hope you're having a great weekend. So for each chunk list in our chunk lists, what we're going to do is we're going to say we need to get the same chunk list in the destination. So you just say destination dot chunk lists chunk list dot flag dot type flag. We need to be able to pass this in. Variable. EST chunk. Wait, what do we need to pass into the chunk list to do this? Oh, we have this written totally differently here. The add component from. And remove component at. We want to remove component to. We want like a public void remove component to chunk dst chunk integer dst index. So we get our destination chunk, so we need to pick our chunk. So the chunks. This is kind of horrible. I don't like how we're doing this. I actually don't think I can do it this way. I think it was correct to have it be orchestrated by some higher being here. and not try to devolve the functionality down into some of the lower level stuff, because it's just awkward. Like managing the cleanup is just awkward. Yeah, calling on from the source the remove entity 2 seems like the worst possible version of this. I think it makes more sense to do the copy from and then call remove entity. It makes more sense for the destination to be driving this process. So at the bottom, we just say source remove entity, entity ID. Maybe it's better to call it somewhere else to call it. So we don't need to pass this through here. Empty with component. Oh, we probably do need to do that. So we say destination, archetype, add entity with component. Don't need to send the type flag. Actually, we do need to send. We do need to pass the source archetype in there, at least. We're getting this entity from this source with this value that we're adding. Okay, so this is when we do, this is how we do this. It's kind of like this reserve first entity available, but a little different. Or first available slot, but a little different here. So we want to ultimately call add component from, but only for the chunks. Yeah, we got to add this. I had this loop here that I got rid of because I didn't want to do it, but I think that's what I think we're gonna have to do it. So we say for each variable component in source.composition. Say component flag. We'll just say component. So for each component in source.composition, we say if composition dot has component. So if, oh no. So for add, we don't actually even need to do this check. We just say for every component flag, we say chunk lists component dot add component from. This is where we say component source. This is where we say, yeah, I don't love this having to pass in the actual chunk. We should do this a little differently. So to do this the way we have it set up, we would need to say variable source chunks, source chunk lists equals source dot chunk lists. We need to do this for each one. We need to say variable source chunk is source dot chunk lists component dot chunks. Oh, we need the entity indices as well. Yeah, I don't love all this. I should have like a get entity address. Or get component chunk, something like that. Let's say, so it's something like source.chunklists component source.entity indices entity ID dot interchunk is this wrong? Source chunk list. So we're getting this value. Oh, dot chunks. Why is this unhappy? And we say, let's say something like variable entity indices equals source dot entity indices for this entity ID. So we want to get that. Let's cache that. That we will use quite a bit. So we say we also say variable source chunk lists is source dot chunk lists. I don't know if that we care enough. You know, the loop is probably smart enough to cache that. We say entity indices dot intra chunk. Okay, so here we go. Sorry, I'm covering up a lot of that. For some reason, I'm used to working code towards the bottom of the screen, but I get that that's annoying because of where my head is here. All right, so now we're up here. We're doing this. All right, so that's all we need to do here. We're basically we're calling the add component from on our destination, and we're giving it the source. So we copy over all the existing components. We do that. And then what we need to do out here, we say, so once the whole copy has been done, we can say source archetype dot remove entity ID. And that will handle the cleanup. And we skip a lot of this stuff. We need to figure out where we're adding this into the entity indices. So we should reassign entity indices. So it's entity indices, once this has happened, is actually going to be a new chunk indices. Its interchunk is chunk. Its interchunk index is chunks per list. Oh, we have to go through this process if we want to do this correctly. Maybe we do this, but with without the loop. Oh, I got someone to ban here. I want to add a sound effect to banning. I'm gonna add that. I swapped the gift bomb sound effect out for something more exciting, and I'm gonna add a ban sound effect. I don't have it set up yet though. Best viewers are already right here. So we're good. We need to do this part. Add component from does this for us. Yeah. Reserve first available slot doesn't, which is weird. A little weird how we do this differently. Not gonna do the add chunk part. We're doing that somewhere else so we can turn this into an expression body. Right? Oh, we need to change this. We need to swap this with first available slot. Zero. Brain zap. Thanks, Brain zap. Fox Shadow, how do you debug this while building it? Are you just building the whole system and then crossing your fingers later? At the moment, we'll start once more of this is in place, we'll have a simple series of tests where we're like, let's try to add an entity. Let's try to add a component to an entity. We won't do that for long. I actually am loath to write code. Normally I'm quite loath to write code in a way that just breaks everything. Partly because I'm streaming and I always want to have something that I can demo. But this is a major enough journey into the unknown that I'm kind of just doing it, and then we'll figure it out. You use print statements almost every new line you write. That works. That works. We'll see. I've made some assumptions here that I'm not totally sure, you know, about. I made some questionable assumptions. But we're trying to do it at least in a way where it'll be very obvious that something's going wrong. We haven't done this in such a way where we're gonna run into like weird memory issues yet. We'll get there, but hopefully we'll have everything working first. We're being pretty conservative with the memory management right now. So hopefully we don't run into any weird stuff like that, at least early on. All right, so we get the entity indices, and then we're going to set the entity indices again. It's going to be chunks per list. So if we're out of space, if it's full, we do this. So we can actually say entity count, blah, blah, blah. So we increase the chunks per list. We actually don't need to do this until after. We don't need to do this before the loop. Do this after the loop. And then what we can do here is we can put in chunks per list. Actually, yeah, so either way, this is chunks per list minus 1 because it's an index. And then this one is going to be entity count plus plus. That's the new entity indices, and then we just assign it to ours. So we say entity indices. Yep, there we go. Easy. Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a brief period of nightmarish, like, none of this works. And then once we get to that point, once we get past that point and everything's kind of working with the basic functionality, then we'll be more conservative about making changes. But right now we're like building this whole thing from scratch. Kind of annoying. There we go. Let's just change it. Scope is small here. Madman. A madman, I say. Yeah, I am. It's okay. We're all mad here. Or we wouldn't be doing this. All right, so theoretically this is add entity with component. So this does the copy over. What we need to do here is the actual add afterwards. We need to say chunk lists. Actually, what we're gonna say, how do we do this? Do we do it here? Do we call this? Seems like not great. Oh, we can send it the chunk. We can just call this set component. I think that's how we're doing this. How do we do it here? Add component, component type set component. Yeah, this is how we're doing it. So we say chunk list add component T. Oh, and you'll figure out which chunk and then do it. Okay. So we're going to say chunk lists. So we just need to know the type of this? That we don't know. So we do need to pass in the flag? No, we can say component type T dot flag? No, dot type flag? No, what? Could have sworn we had an option for this. Yeah, component type T dot flag. Oh, this isn't static. That's unfortunate. So we can't do it this way. Tatea. Yeah, there's a Discord. Go to my link tree in the description. There's a Discord link there if you'd like to join us. All right, so we can't do that. So should we just pass the flag? Is that probably the easiest thing to do, is to just include the flag? I thought there was a clever way I could get from the type to the flag, but I can't because this is not. You would need to be able to get this somehow, which you can't do unless you know the concrete type you're dealing with. All right, that's fine. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say chunk lists. Are we doing that here? Yeah, so we just know the type flag. Let's just pass it through. Put the source archetype first. Oh, yeah. So type flag. Actually, no. That was fine ordering. Let's just add the type flag. Type flag. Now we can just use the type flag. So we can say type flag. We could also call this component, but that would alias something else. So we say chunk list type flag dot add component value. Where T is unmanaged. Ugh. Why did everything break? Oh. My mistake. Semicolon. A single semicolon broke everything, as it often does. This music is weird. Oh, it's this artist I dislike. Downvote. All right, that should be it. So we say chunklist.add component. So we add component from this source here. And then for the new component that's brand new here, we add component for the value. Let's look at that. These do the same things. These add chunks when needed. We add the entity indices here for the new set. So if we needed to add another chunk, this just does a check to see if we did. It's kind of inefficient that we add the check here, and then we also add the check to each chunk list. So each chunk list does this check. But it's like the alternative is to like loop twice, or to like, it's just a lot more lookups. I don't really want to do that. I think this is fine. So we get the entity indices, and then so we do a cleanup. We need to do the cleanup, which we don't handle here. That's handled here, and we just say source archetype remove entity. So once the destination has finished adding the entity with this component, then we just remove it from the source archetype. And that's more flexible because then we can reuse the remove entity logic for other situations, like when we delete an entity. Instead of binding the remove entity with the add entity, it makes more sense to just do it after, because we have the source archetype already. And then we get rid of this code, which is the way that we previously did it, where we just went back and forth a lot here. Then all we need to do is this archetype by entity ID thing. We just reassign this. And I think that's good for today. That wasn't much. What we probably should do is rewrite the remove component. It's probably the next thing we should do is rewrite the remove component for the same kind of deal. There's some streamers that are doing a game jam this weekend that a lot of people are participating in. I think we're going to raid them and hang out with them for a little bit, because I think I'm at time for today. Next thing up is to do the remove component, to redo the remove component the same way we've done up here. Yeah, I think that's it. I appreciate everyone for hanging out. Thanks again, JD Does Dev, for the raid. Appreciate everyone hanging out here on a Saturday. Let's give some love to Tabugi, who are hosting the Tobu Jam right now this weekend. Let's go hang out with them. No stream next week because of holiday reasons out here in the States. So we'll be back in early December. First Tuesday in December. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. I will see you next time. Bye.